Hello, and welcome to another episode of Books in the World, brought to you for more than 40 years now by the Cape Cod Writers Center. I'm Ray Cormier, and I'm your host today for a discussion of one of the most famous unsolved crimes in American history, the 1990 theft of 13 works of art from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. 31 years later, none of the artworks, now estimated to be worth $500 million, with a B, none of them have been found, and no one has ever been charged in the case. The stolen pieces include masterpieces by Rembrandt, Vermeer, Degas, and Manet. My guest today is one of the foremost experts on the heist, Stephen Kurkjian, a former investigative reporter and a founder of the famed Spotlight team at the Boston Globe. After leaving the Globe, Steve wrote Master Thieves, the Boston gangsters who pulled off the world's greatest art heist. And that book summarizes and adds to about a quarter century of reporting on the case, right, Steve? Welcome.
That's right.
Your book was published in 2015, this particular book, but
Yes.
I'm betting it's going to get some renewed interest in the wake of a brand new Netflix documentary that debuted April 7th. It's called This Is a Robbery, and you are among the experts interviewed in it. I'll get back to that a little later, the series itself a little later, but could you tell us how you initially were drawn into reporting on the theft and the investigation into it? Because you indicate in the book's introduction that your family's connection to the museum actually played a role.
It did. It's not very direct. We're not of that brow, but I did. But I did have. I did have a friend who was a trustee of the museum, and right after the theft happened, I was in Washington at the time reporting, doing other things, political reporting, and I called him, and he was pretty assured that even though there was a dreadful, devastating loss, that it was going to be found. The FBI was assuring it, the museum and its trustees, that they were going to be able to solve this, get the paintings back. And when I get back to Boston 2 or 3 years later, and was doing investigative reporting in the city room, I thought about, the crime remained unsolved, but we had other things, I had other things to do. But in 1997, the Boston Herald, and Boston was a 2-newspaper town, still is, but then very competitive. They had a headline that said, "We've seen it," with a photo of the one of the 13 pieces that were stolen.
Yeah, the Storm on the Sea of Galilee.
Storm on the Sea of Galilee, which is Rembrandt's seascape.
Rembrandt's only seascape.
Yeah, only seascape. And their reporter, Tom Ashberg, who I knew from the Globe, he had worked at the Globe, had started falling out or something, and he had alleged in this article to have seen something that he felt was the Rembrandt. The Globe. I was in the newsroom at the time. It was in late August, and I was. An editor came by my desk and said, "Could you help us out here?" And of course, I threw my body and soul into it. And my late father was a commercial artist, still alive then, and he said to me, "Oh, now you're doing something wonderful. This is really good. You're going to really help solve this case. Get that artwork back." And later to learn the reason why he was so involved in interested is that he used to visit the museum. A boy, grown up in Watertown, he would visit the museum because he had this ability. I call it a drop of mercurical that distinguishes you as an artist. We don't have. We're newspaper people. We're skilled. But we don't have art in us. Knowing my dad was a terrific guy, and I could say later in life, I said, "I'm going to stay on this story. We're going to get it." And when I retired 10 years later, it was still unsolved. But I thought, I could help by writing a book on it. And the book came out on the 15th anniversary of the theft, 2015. And it's called Master Thieves. Right. It was a different odyssey in writing a book than writing longer articles for the Globe,
Hmm.
because this had to be interesting. I knew the facts I was going to be working with, and come up with some good stuff that I feel very proud of now. Now 6 years later, that has held up
Hmm.
and has given other investigators good leads on it. And this documentary almost uses my book as a skeleton as to who, what, where, and when,
Right.
and why.
Yeah. Well,
So I'm very proud of the book, but it was a very different process than
right.
writing articles for the Globe.
What in particular? I mean, as a former newspaper man, I can only guess at some of the problems doing a book by yourself rather than
Right.
a much shorter piece with an editor. Is there something in particular that you thought was so different and or so much more difficult?
I think, when you do an investigative story, you're seeking to convince the reader of the undeniability of what you've come up with and the importance of it.
Hmm.
And it doesn't, you can, there have been terrific articles written about nuclear warheads. Well, that's dense stuff. It doesn't have to be interesting. But when you're going to put it together between some hard covers, you've got to make it interesting, let me say, engaging and entertaining. And I kept on thinking to myself, I've got to make this more interesting. And it didn't. The interest was in the story itself. I
Hmm.
mean, this thing. This is 13 pieces of art, 3 Rembrandts, the only Vermeer in all of New England, from a museum that was built in order to engage us Americans into art appreciation. While I struggle to make the words rhyme and make it mellifluous, if I might say, um, that I didn't need to. The story itself is so engaging.
Yeah, yeah, that's often the case.
Yeah,
The story is enough as
right.
long as you
Sorry.
tell it clearly and succinctly. Well, as your subtitle indicates, your book is kind of a tutorial on organized crime in and around Boston in the last quarter of the 20th
Yeah.
century. Um, can you summarize for viewers why it's believed that some of the New England's crudest mobsters who have been suspects in the theft of some of the world's grandest art? It's
Yeah.
an interesting paradox.
It is. It is. But and I think I probably already knew this, having done stories at the time. There was a ne'er do well, fascinating character from Boston named Miles Connor, who wasn't mobster per se, but he was art thief per se.
Right.
And his rock and roll band attracted all sorts of ne'er-do-wells and mobsters. And it was a pretty good band. And they, I think some of the people who hung out with him after his shows, they started talking because he had done art theft as well. They started talking scores, and that's you come up with this jargon. That's the jargon of the criminal world. Score is a place that you can rob, break into, and make some money. And from over the years of the people had seen that this museum had incredible art in it, and the second, but the sin of it was that it didn't have very good security,
Mhm.
and it had become known in the art world, but excuse me, in the bad guy world, but it also had become known to Miles, and he had cased it with some people, and but he was in jail when the theft went down. They accrued. You're right, they're crude, but they're also very, very wily. They're unsleeping malevolence. One politician once said that about the Globe, but really they are unsleeping. They keep their eyes open, eyes in the back of their heads, as our parents would say, and they were always looking for scores. And and Miles gave them that this place was vulnerable to a theft. And one of the people Miles had pulled a robbery off, pulled a art theft off, was a fellow who I think is at the center of this theft here. A long ago mob associate in Boston named Robert Donati. And a year after the theft, in my book, I first set it up. In my book, I have an interview with someone who was very convincing. He is referenced in the book as an intermediary to a
Right.
mob leader, and but you see and you read it, there's not too many people who could have given me this detail and these quotes. And he was a mob leader, and Donati was a member of this man's gang. And the man had been arrested several months before the Gardner Museum theft. And because Donati knew the value, not for cashing in the artwork, but that the authorities will talk to you. You know, the authorities are not going to talk to a minor league mobster like Bobby Donati. But if Bobby Donati could say to them, I could access the Gardner Museum's paintings that have been stolen, that they would be willing to talk.
Right. It turns out, it didn't realize until I read your book how much leverage having stolen art can be for a mobster.
The wonderful thing about this world too, it is, but it isn't. To us, you know, we deal in facts and in probability. Mob world doesn't do it that much. They deal in rumor, in myth, in suspicion. So the reason why Donati believed that the feds would talk to him if he had these paintings stashed away was because something had happened 20 years before that he was involved with that involved stolen artwork. And Donati believed, as does most of Boston, mob Boston then, I don't know so much now, but then certainly in the late 80s, early 90s, that if you have a piece of stolen art, they will deal with you. The example that Donati had in his mind, if you looked at it factually, you'll see that the thief who had stolen a piece of art in order to get himself out of a jam on another art case, he got the same sentence. He got 8 years. He didn't get any reduction. He was able to serve it as one 8-year sentence, but it was still 8 years. And that's why he had stolen a piece out of the MFA in Boston, believing that he was going to be able to barter, get out of jail free card. It's not. The feds are not, going to do business on something like that, And, but out of that case came this myth that it's a get out of jail free card. And that's what Donati had in his mind. And the reason why he wanted that his mob leader was in jail, had been jailed for trafficking 3 months before. Did he try on his own? The mob leader, according to my contact, said he had told Donati, don't do it. I'm here on racketeering. The feds are not letting any mob leader out of jail, no matter what you've stolen. Okay. And so my scenario is Donati was left, having stolen this artwork, was left with this art, possession of this art in his house. And you are talking, now they say it's more than $1 billion. Wow. But you're talking a Vermeer, Vermeer, artist of the ages, Rembrandt, artist of the ages. And these pieces of art would still be missing because they haven't been found. It's a true loss to the city, a true tragedy.
Let's go on. Your book sort of crisscrosses three elements that made the crime possible, right, and its resolution seemingly impossible. You had the chutzpah of these professional criminals.
Right.
And you mentioned briefly the lack of security at the museum.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
then,
And lack of insurance. The museum had no insurance,
oh,
no
no kidding.
replacement insurance,
No
no
kidding.
replacement.
Oh,
That,
wow.
and that's, and not only does that mean a pot of gold that you can negotiate on, but the insurance company will deal with you. The feds won't deal. They'll say, hey, show up in court, you'll make your deal with the judge. But the insurance company will do
That is
whatever number
amazing.
you're looking for.
That is amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
That they didn't have insurance.
But they were threadbare. They were threadbare. During those years in the 80s, the museum was, in fact, a couple of years had lost money. So.
Oh, okay. And then the third element was what you call the nonchalance of the FBI. It always said, like,
Yes.
and you said it left you with nagging questions.
Yeah.
But back to the security, what was the basic problem there? They just didn't care about it, or they didn't couldn't afford to do anything?
You like everything else, you've got top tiered people, but who care, probably well paid or pretty well paid at the director level, assistant director level, but you're only as safe as your weakest link. And they had some pretty weak links, kids out of college, dropouts out of college. And Rick, the one who made the fatal error here of letting the bad guys in, he knew. He had in his guidebook, you're not supposed to let anybody in after hours.
Yeah.
And
Rick Abbott is the young man, you said.
Yeah, Rick Abbott.
He was the guy who let him in. Geez, the circumstantial evidence point to him possibly being an accomplice.
Isn't it? And they didn't, he says they did, they questioned me that day. They brought me in for a lie detector test. He says he passed it. Others who have seen the results said it wasn't a complete pass, but it was passing enough that they didn't hang him up by his thumbs.
So that's why. Okay.
And he said to me, my first interview with him up in Vermont, where he was at the time, I got him out of his tar paper shack house. He didn't show like he had a windfall in any time of his life.
Right.
He said to me, I wasn't very well trained. I knew what I was supposed to do, but I could show up drunk or stoned, and I did. It didn't matter. Nothing ever happened at this shift. But like I say, you're only as safe as that weakest link. Right. And Rick had a bit of an attitude. He's his real passion in his life was rock and roll. He had started a band, and there's some terrific, not to plug the documentary, but there's some terrific tape. And I think the first episode of parties at Rick's house, his dormitory, his fraternity house, sort of. Just nobody went to college, and they would throw these great parties in the basement and raise enough money for the rent for the month. Okay. But Rick said, I'd leave that at 11:30 at night and roll into the job, and I was drunk or a stone. Sometimes one time he said they had a party, and it sounds like it was just a drunken, drug-dazed party, and all his pals are sort of wandering around at midnight, the museum. So that does not tell me that they were on their toes throughout the.
Now, interestingly, the statute of limitations for the robbery charges ran out in 1995, I think, right?
Yeah, and 5 years later.
Pretty quickly. Why again, quickly, can't go into too much detail, but why did the FBI even come close to an arrest in this case or making a deal? I mean, the reward now is up to $10 million.
Yep.
I don't know. How did they fail? What do you think, the FBI?
I don't know how they do what they do. My presumption is that they don't build the case like reporters do. They get someone who wants to make a deal, and they sit down, they bring him in, and they ask them or him or her very good questions, or who else are your accomplices. So we get the network, as much of the network we get. Or they look in their files for armed robbery disguises police officers, and they go to those individuals and they squeeze them. They're good on squeezing, and they pay attention to that, and they offer deals. You know, you could be get interstate transportation of stolen property. That's 20 years. We don't have to go for the interstate. Let's drop it down to 5. You know, they're good at negotiating.
Right.
But
they weren't good at. But you get the impression they weren't good at also getting help from other law enforcement agencies.
No, that's the first thing. They're very proud.
They want to go it alone, huh? They want to do it all themselves.
They want to do it alone. Yeah. The sense is to give them their due on that issue. You know, you can say they're glory hounds. Yes, you can say that. Whether it's true or not, you know, you have to be a reporter working these guys and these individuals and know how hard they work. They work day and night. And when there's force needed, it's their shoulders, it's their lives that are on the line. But the point I wanted to make is when they don't do it the way we reporters do, the first time I saw a name here, I went to the clips and I saw he had been charged in a crime. I went to that crime and I saw between 89 and 91, there had been state police, Massachusetts state police surveillance, video and the telephonic surveillance of these people who were alleged by the museum now, by the feds now, to have something to do with the Gardner case. 10 years later, their names came up. Had anyone gone back to look at the case? No one had gone back. And it seemed to me, they don't do it how we do it. You know, they don't build a story. They wait to get the person who is most vulnerable to being squeeze him or her until they say, what can I do? What can my lawyer do with you so we can get out of this? And yes, the crime is over. The statute of limitations on the crime is over. But possession of this artwork, that's still a very powerful crime, a case that could be made against anybody.
Sure.
But the feds have said, if you bring the material in to us, we won't charge you. No one gets charged. Just bring it in. We'll drive you over to the museum, and there's a $10 million check waiting.
Which is one reason.
Because of that, it seemed to me to be a deal that you couldn't leave on the table. You have to pick that up if you had any involvement in this stuff or knowledge of where the artwork was. Yet not only not a piece has been returned, not a piece has been seen.
Right.
The FBI told me in 2010, legitimately 11 years ago, but I think this is still the case. We haven't had a proof of life sighting of any of the stolen artwork in the last 10 years. They haven't have someone to show them a photo. If I were to go into the museum or the FBI say, I have the bona fides, start dealing with me, they're going to say, what do you have to show that you're telling us the truth? If I bring in a photo of any of the 13 pieces, open sesame, the world open, you become prince of the city. But no one has been able to do that to the feds. So that's why it's really a compelling case. And I think that's why one of the reasons why the Netflix documentary is getting such attention.
You know, 3 years after that 2010 statement you made, that was the 23rd anniversary of the heist, and the top agent FBI agent in Boston, Richard Delorier, had this big press conference.
Right.
You spent some time talking about it.
Yeah.
He dramatically declared that the FBI knew who had done the robbery and that the art was taken to Connecticut and then to Philadelphia over the years. But they gave no names or details. So was that all a show?
Yes. But for ultimate purpose, and the ultimate purpose is to get the people reaching out to the FBI to say, I've got information. I hear what the names, you're not using the names. The names doesn't do the feds any good. It's the names of the people who have the paintings now. They're not going to give out. That's why the names, it didn't matter to them, the names of who did it. And I'm not sure they had it at 100%. I think Delorier, like the people that he chased all the time, may stretch they're not earning their pay by telling the truth and nothing but the truth to the public. What they're trying to do is just to get the talk going and hoping they'll get a call that says, yes, you're right. On who did it. I know who did it, but more important, I know where they are. I know who has them now. I know where they went, because that's what Deloria was stressing. It went on a network. It came from Maine down to Middle Atlantic. He was saying Connecticut, and then to Philadelphia. But Philadelphia, we've sent reporters to Philadelphia, good investigative reporters. Philadelphia, the Philadelphia mob and the Philadelphia FBI says that was a surprise to us. We don't know it. We have no idea.
Now, it's interesting. The documentary, the documentary seems to follow your book a lot in terms of what it's concluding or implying happened.
The word spying was used to me when they said, it said a couple of weeks ago, but fine.
But it must be pretty rewarding to see that your reporting seems to stand up.
Thanks, Ray. That is very important, because as I'm typing away in my basement, right where I was filmed, I would say to myself, do I have this? Do I have, three confirming sources? How good is this? And my editor or my agent kept saying, Steve, just make it dramatic. Just make it dramatic. But my need was to make sure that I had it. And I do think from the reporting that has, or the disclosures that have been made since then, that I did have it. I did have it as to who the thief was, the motivation for it, and some of the terrific details that they bring video to, film to.
So after all these years, you still feel pretty confident that Bobby Donati was the central figure, and he was working with a couple other guys,
right?
And
wherever he hid them, maybe he sold one or two. I don't know that to stay alive. But the reason why he was killed was because people found out, and this is, I think, where the next drama is in this. Bobby Donati was just a low-level guy, and he had this artwork of the ages in his house, and people learned of it. People in that bad guy world, and they started to squeeze him. And it may be art of the ages, the most. How do I say it? The most just fulfilling art of the ages.
Right.
But
it's fab. Some of it is
unless you have the ability to defend it, and he didn't, and he suffered a brutal death. As his sister said to me, he didn't. Said to the Herald reporter at the time, he did not need to die that way. He was brutally murdered.
Yeah. So you're continuing to think about writing more about this?
Yes, I still think that there is a final chapter. I had one of the best Boston book agents I went to after I retired. Terrific story. You got a name, Steve. Let's solve the crime. You got to get a recovery to get a book. And I just did not feel that, I can do some work, I can do some revelation, but that's not my job. My job is to write the story.
Exactly.
And, but I still got terrific, I think, narrative to tell about this.
Well, good luck. I'm hoping we're running out of time here, but I'm hoping we see more about it, and you can get even closer to a resolution. Let me remind the audience that the book is Master Thieves.
Right.
If you're looking up, it's published by Public Affairs Press.
Right.
Thank you, Steve Kurkjian, for your great reporting and for joining us today. Take care, and we'll see you down the road.
Thank you for having me, Ray. Be well.